On today's content, my last build guide for Blight. This is a Winter Orb Chieftain and boys and girls, it's nasty. I'm actually really stoked to share this with you because the character was such a roller coaster of emotions, as he originally was a Spectral Shield throw cast on crit thing, but that failed miserably, and instead of deleting the character, I decided to respec him into using Winter Orb. And with all honesty, the biggest mistake I made was not playing him earlier in the league. He is really that good. So here's the deal, we're gonna go through everything that composes the build and some final thoughts. But before that happens, your task is that if you end up enjoying the video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. With Exile happening this weekend, there's gonna be a lot of hype and a lot of stuff coming through in the next following days, and I'm gonna be definitely talking about it, so be sure to be here when that happens. Besides that, I tend to post builds on the channel that may also interest you, veteran and new player alike. This is going to be a long video, so get something to eat or drink or have it in the background, and let's talk about Winter Orb. The concept for the build is a bit complex. We are playing Winter Orb with the King of Fire damage, the Chieftain. We're doing this because we can convert 100% of our cold damage to fire. Our biggest priority besides the conversion is cast speed. Winter Orb got gutted a little while ago because it was a pretty degenerate skill, as it did everything for you with little investment. However, nowadays to keep Winter Orb at a pretty competent state, we need to make sure that it's hitting hard, but mostly hitting fast. Duration is irrelevant, so the main focus is the cast speed. The build can start out cheap, but will get expensive really fast, and it's due to two things: your RNG and the availability of items. A lot of the gear I'm wearing is self-crafted, as some of it was not even available for trade. Some of it did not cooperate and ended up costing a pretty penny. We are using very specific modifiers on the gear, but don't let that deter you from playing the build. As I said, it starts out cheap, but eventually ramps up in investment costs. At the end of the day, you're the one who decides how much currency gets invested into your characters, but this one has definitely a very specific upgrade route, and that's gonna get him a bit expensive in the long run. So with all of that out of the way, let's dig in. First, I'm gonna show you the 3 and Ascendancy, and both of them look like this. Alright, time for the gear. First things first, the Noggin Fortress. I recommend an Elder Vase with either fist damage or fire damage to spells, and the modifier Socketed Gems are supported by level X conk effect. This last mod gives you a modest amount of area damage, and in combination with the previous spell mods, a good rolled helmet really bumps the DPS a hefty chunk. Optimally, you want life and maybe a resistance. You can also try to get nearby enemies have negative fire resistance on here as well. For enchantments, Winter Orb stages are the #1 undisputed option, but Winter Orb damage is fine too. Flammability Curse effect is alright as well. Now comes the next vital important piece, and that is your weapon. I am using a shaped mace. I crafted mine with Etheric and Scorched Fossils, and I wanted the modifiers Enemies Killed Explode, which is a suffix, and Damage Penetrates Fire Resistance, which is a prefix. With this combination, and after a couple of annulment orbs, I have 2 open suffixes and 2 open prefixes to play with. A multimod leaves me with 1 suffix, so I crafted cast speed, cold damage to spells, and spell damage. I got extremely lucky with the roll, and in turn ended up with an extremely powerful piece of equipment. A similar one is probably a hefty amount of currency. To get you started, you can get away with using a shaped mace with enemy skilled explode, elemental resistance penetration, area damage, and you can craft cold damage to spells. It's specific, but they are not very rare, so do not sweat it. The third important piece of equipment is a chest with Socketed Gems are supported by level 1 Arcane Surge, which is mandatory because it gives us mana regen and cast speed while it's active. Besides that mod, you want life and resistances. Now for the less out of the norm stuff. One of the rings needs the modifier Curse enemies with level 5 flammability on hit. This is mandatory, but it's super common on trade. You want life, resists, mana and an open suffix to craft a minimum frenzy charge. The other ring needs resists, life, fire damage and an open suffix to craft another frenzy charge. The amulet needs cast speed, life and either a lot of increased spell damage, cold damage or fire damage. And it also needs an open suffix to craft the last frenzy charge. We are also going to be anointing this with Harrier for movement speed and more cast speed. On your shield you want life, cast speed, a resistance or two and either a ton of spell, fire or cold damage. You also need an open prefix to craft added fire and cold damage. Next, you're gonna use Stygian Vice with life, resists, either increased cold, fire or elemental damage. Optimally, an open prefix to craft increased damage. On your hand grabs, you want fingerless silk gloves with life, dexterity, a resistance and an open suffix to craft increased elemental damage if you have crit recently. Lastly, the legs need movement speed, life and resistances. Optimally, you want the enchantment damage penetrates elemental resistances if you haven't killed recently for the single target DPS. For flasks, you want a silver and a sulfur flask with the increased cast speed suffix on both of them. The last flask is a wise oak, and for this one you need the fire resistance to be the highest uncapped one. If that is not the case, use a defensive one like a Rami's concoction. Now for the jewels, and the most important one is a Watcher's Eye with added cold damage while affected by hatred. The Hypnotic Eye on your Stygian Vice needs life, cast speed and flat fire or cold damage to spells. The rest of the jewels need life, cast speed and whatever else you may be missing, resists, mana cost, regen, etc. Okay, now we talk about the gem setups. On the chest, we are using Winter Orb linked to Call to Fire, Elemental Focus, Greater Multiple Projectiles, Conk Effect and Inspiration Support. Remember that Arcane Surge is here intrinsically, which makes this setup a 7-link. GMP is not getting removed for single target, and that is because this skill has some very wonky interaction with the projectile impact, or so I understand. Anyways, the point is that you're not swapping it for anything else during single target damage phases. For auras, you need Hatred, Herald of Ash, Herald of Ice and an Enlighten level 3 to have mana to play with. The skill is going to be cheap to cast, but this setup is going to lock 92% of your total mana pool, so keep that in mind. You also need an Ancestral War Chief or an Ancestral Protector linked to multiple totems, combustion and stun. Enemies ignited by these totems will have less fire resistance, which is huge for single target DPS. At the same time, you need Baal Righteous Fire and Baal Haste linked to increased duration. Using both is a massive DPS bump and you really only use them on tough bosses. Using one is fine during early mapping, but both are a nice buff later on. The movement skill I chose is Shield Charge, and that is linked to faster attacks, Endurance Charge on Millstone and Fortify. At the same time, this entire setup is going to give you some crispy damage mitigation that is hard to pass up. Lastly, for gems, you want Lightning Golem and Enduring Cry. The Golem gives us a bit of cast speed, and Enduring Cry will help you generate endurance charges when you cannot generate them via Shield Charge. Okay then, all of that was a huge mouthful, so now it's time to talk about my thoughts. Personally, I keep hitting myself for not building him earlier. He is a very powerful character and a lot of fun to play. However, the playstyle is not for everybody, as it's kinda weird. If you really think about it, it's like playing Blade Flurry, but it lingers for a bit after you're done using it. It's also ranged and it fires on its own. The cast speed I keep shielding for is mandatory. To make this feel absolutely disgusting, you need to bump the hit rate. That means cast speed. Currently, with all the buffs, my character has 13 casts per second. That translates to 6.37 hits per second. Personally, I advise aiming for at least 10 to 11 cast speed. You're also going to channel this to deal damage. Do not rely on the shrimp dick duration of the skill, nor should you rely on its autocasts while it's not getting channeled. Despite the legacy the skill has, do not trust it. The fixed version requires you to play the game and not cast it once and run around like a headless chicken while it murders everything for you. As for what it can do, pretty much everything that has no elemental reflect on it. Anything else gets done without a sweat and it's very satisfying to play. The only drawback is that you're at the mercy of the orb, so if it feels like prioritizing barrels instead of enemies, you're gonna have to wiggle around until it realizes that there are hostiles nearby. Because of its erratic behavior, blighted maps may be a bit sketchy, but it's thanks to the big brain inside Winter Orb. This is a build that you should definitely not pass up. Winter Orb was a meme for the majority of synthesis because it really did your job for free. It only needed duration and enough cast speed to keep the uptime. That is not possible anymore, but that doesn't mean that the skill is not good, because quite the contrary, it sure as hell vomits damage. Personally, I think this build is going to shine on Delve, but going deeper than 300 is probably going to need a bit more min-maxing and great gear to sustain him down there. Anyways, that's gonna be it for the character. Again, if you enjoyed the content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. The schedule for the coming days/weeks is thoughts on the Exile Con announcements and some closing thoughts on Blight. Besides PoE stuff, if Microsoft hurries up and releases Halo Reach on Steam anytime soon, I may have some content for that too. Until the next league, that is. So yeah, thank you so much for watching today's content, and I hope to see you on the next one. Peace.